As a dog trainer, I've helped countless dogs of all ages learn to walk nicely on leash with rewards-based training. Regardless of whether it's a young puppy or an adult dog that's been pulling for years, the training principles that I use stay the same. Recently, I had the chance to sit down with Kelly Fahey for an interview about leash training and other related skills for her Puppy Blueprint virtual conference. This free event features over 25 dog professionals all sharing their expertise on raising puppies. However, a lot of the insights, including mine on leash training, do apply to dogs of all ages. The conference runs from January 27th to February 9th, so if you're watching this video during that time, I highly encourage you to sign up using the link in the caption and comments. Again, it's completely free. This was my first video interview, so I will admit that I was a bit nervous at first. However, it turned out to be a fun, engaging conversation, and I think that we really covered the key principles for successful leash training. I believe that this conversation will really change how you think about and how you approach leash training with your dog, so I'm so grateful that Kelly let me share it with you here. Throughout the interview, I referenced some training tutorials that I filmed with real clients' dogs, so if you want to watch those, I've included links to them below. I also have a 6-week step-by-step leash training guide that breaks down what to teach your dog and more importantly when to teach it for the perfect dog walks. That's also linked in the caption and comments. Now let's jump into the interview. I really hope you enjoy it. If there's a certain part that you find particularly helpful, or if you have any questions about the things that we talk about, please let me know in the comments.
Hi, and welcome to your Puppy Blueprint, where you can stop guessing, wondering, and Googling how to have a well-behaved puppy and discover how to turn the chaos to calm. I'm your host, Kelly Fahey, and today I'm joined by Stephanie Romba, and she's with Happy Hounds Dog Training. And we're going to be chatting about leash training and other related skills. But before we get to that, I want to welcome in Stephanie. Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you could be here and be part of the event. I love putting this on every year, and I'm always so grateful that people like yourself will come on and share such valuable information. But before we get to all that valuable information, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself. How did you find yourself into the dog training world? Who do you share your home with? We always love to hear about the furry family members, or, sometimes they're feathered or scaly.
Yeah, so my history, my mom was actually a dog trainer. So from my longest recollection, I think I started dog training when I was about 7 years old. So it's been most of my life. By high school, I was actually helping her run dog training classes. So definitely deeply ingrained. For a while, I thought that, you don't want to follow your parents' footsteps. So I went into a completely different field in my 20s and then found that I was still training friends' dogs and my own dogs and kind of obsessed with the dog training world. So I came back and yeah, about 3 years ago, I started my own company called Happy Hounds. So I'm the trainer and owner of it here in Edmonton, and the rest is history.
That's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so do you have any doggies at home, any kitties, anybody that you share your home with right now?
Yeah, so one pet right now, her name's Nira. She's a corgi cattle dog cross, so very high energy, very fun. She has 2 weeks ago, she just had surgery, so she's confined to a pen right now and a little bit unhappy, but normally she's my hiking partner and lots of fun.
Uh, Cattle dog corky mix. That is quite the.
Yes. Trying to chain her when she was a puppy to stop chasing. At the time, I had a household cat, and
Uh,
just rodents and stuff outside was the biggest challenge I had with her. But she's
I
awesome.
I bet I love a cattle dog. I'm a big pit bull lover, but I have come across some cattle dogs, and they are just wonderful dogs. I love them, but I also do enjoy the more spirited dogs. So,
Yes. Yeah, I know. I didn't ever think that I would have a small dog. I assumed Rottweilers and stuff was going to be what I'd have for life. I just prefer bigger dogs. And then when I was in my 20s, I rescued a corgi pug mix.
oh my goodness.
He was on like the death list at the SPCA. It was a long story, but I fell in love with that dog. And now ever since, I only get corgi cross breeds. So it's funny how as soon as you have one, you switch. But
Yeah, you kind of fall in love with something, and then you're like, I can't imagine my life without any of this type of dog anymore. And
yeah,
that's what happened. We got our first pit bull. He came to us accidentally, and I was like, oh my God, I just love him so much. And then I just haven't looked back, and we've just had pit bulls ever since then.
yep.
So yeah. Well, Before we dive into how to help with the leash walking skills, I thought we would tackle like a basic question to get us started. Often puppies or even dogs are labeled as being like stubborn or headstrong or just plain old difficult. But why do dogs actually pull on leash?
I have multiple reasons. Is it okay if I break down numerous, or do you want kind of an overview?
Yeah, you can hit us with whatever you got. So feel
Okay.
free to share anything at all.
So I think the main one, and people don't necessarily think about it, is that dogs naturally they walk differently than us, right? If you watch an off-leash dog, they tend to zoom really quickly in one spot, they'll slow down, they'll sniff, they'll walk really slowly, and then sprint again. Whereas if you watch the average human go for a walk, it's pretty consistent pace. And often when we're trying to walk dogs on leash, we're trying to ask them to walk the way we do. And it doesn't work unless that dog has had some training. And then there's lots of other reasons we can go into, such as like their noses are so powerful. So if they pull towards a smell, that can be really reinforcing for them. They're not exercised enough. Definitely, there's an incompatibility between the guardian's lifestyle and the dog's going to want to pull, and lots of other reasons.
Yeah, and I mean that nose is very powerful, so that is going to drive, that puppy
Yeah.
or that dog to all those great scents. I mean, we don't might not smell them, but their nose is so powerful they can, and that's how they see the world through their nose, and so
Yeah.
they're going to do that. Yeah, and you bring up a good point. We've got two legs, they've got four, so they're going to outgate us every single time.
hmm
Yeah,
Yeah, especially, I mean, depending on breed, like some of those dogs, if you think my herding breed, like they are designed to run in the field for hours upon hours, and I am not. So
right.
there's definitely an exercise difference as well. And yeah, you mentioned the nose. I mean, depending on breed, they usually 1,000 to 10,000 times better sense of smell than us. So they just see the world so differently than we do and are going to be encouraged to things that we don't even know exist, right?
Yeah. And
And
we as humans, we obviously want to keep our dogs safe, so we clip a leash on them. But from the dog's point of view, boy, we are holding them back.
yeah, well, and like their favorite thing to do when they're out is smell. And I often tell people too, like I think if your dog pulls on leash, one of the things I've seen is people often get a shorter and shorter leash, thinking that they're going to have more control that way. But it usually backfires because if you really logically think about it, now the dog has pulled towards a smell, which that smell is now reinforcing and encourages the pulling. So the dog doesn't really feel like that leash tension results in anything negative, right?
Right.
They got towards something great. Where if we use a longer leash, they can move off the path and they can enjoy smelling and still have tension-free walks. So
Mhm.
it's a great place to start.
Yeah, and that concept of using a longer leash, sometimes, people kind of look at you like you're a little crazy that you've
Yeah.
spoken. Like, what do you mean a longer leash? That's just going to make my dog pull even more. But as you mentioned, that shorter leash, they really have no choice but to pull because they don't have anywhere to go.
Mhm.
But when they
Yeah.
have that longer leash, they're going to walk a little faster than us. So they're not pulling because we are slowing them
Yeah.
down. And we don't see as much pulling that way. And that can really help us out a lot. But yeah, it does sound counterintuitive, right? My dog pulls, let's go on a longer leash. That sounds crazy.
Yeah, it's one of the usually the biggest discussions I have with new clients, whether it's reactivity or leash pulling, is they're very hesitant to increase the leash length because they think the dog's gonna their behavior's gonna get worse, they're gonna be farther away, so harder control. And it's funny when you talk somebody into it and they try it the first couple times and it's an amazing thing how much it instantly improves the
Yeah.
walks because they're allowed to go and do dog things and still not yank our arm off, right? Like there's go explore the scents and have a really good time. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and you bring up something good. Like they're just doing dog things. Like they're not being
yeah,
bad or stubborn or difficult. They're just doing dog things. And we're trying to kind of like conform to what this walk we think
yeah.
should be, but they're just doing dog stuff the whole time.
Yeah, I always try to just remind people that dogs' main sense is smell. Like that is how they perceive the world. And it'd be kind of like us if, you go out for a walk, you see the beautiful views and you get to enjoy that. If you had to close your eyes and turn off our main scent, which is seeing, you wouldn't enjoy the walk as much. So by asking dogs to be in a strict heel, never get to sniff anything, like you're really taking away the best part of the walk for them. So
Right. Yeah. Like imagine you bring up a good point. Like we see everything. Obviously, our main senses are eyes. Can you imagine like going to the Grand Canyon and just somebody blindfolding you and
yeah.
being able to explore that beauty and everything? That would be really hard and frustrating for us and everything. So yeah,
Yeah, I
we're
think about a lot like oh sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say that just can be frustrating for us for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is to go out on hikes. And like I mentioned, I take my dog quite often, but that feeling when you've walked for a few hours and you summit and you see this like beautiful view. I can't imagine if somebody's like, close your eyes now, you don't get to experience that. It would completely change that outing. So I think we have to keep in mind what makes walks enjoyable for dogs and make sure we allow that to be an aspect of it while also training the skills we want, which is not pulling our arm off.
Yeah, and I love that example that you just used about going on that hike and then maybe seeing that sunset. And all the while you're on that walk, you're taking everything in, right? You're
Mhm.
going at your pace, you're taking things in, you're watching the bluebird over here, you're seeing, all these different things, and you're admiring the nature and the beauty. And how would you feel if somebody hurried you along if you were trying to take that in? And your dog
Yeah.
to do the same thing while they're at your, like, walking with you. They're trying to take it in the way that they take it in and everything.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love that
Or
example.
even thinking, if you had a hiking partner that every single time you wanted to stop and take a look at the view or something, they yelled at you for taking too long or they wanted you to hurry up, like you would very quickly not really want to go walk with that hiking partner anymore. You
Yeah.
would choose somebody that also wants to stop and enjoy the view. And I think, yeah, walks is it's the dog's opportunity to get out of the confinement of the house, and we really should find ways to make it enjoyable for them as well.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that with hiking with a partner, because it can even be as simple as if you have a partner and you go to the mall together and they're like, I don't want to go to the mall. And they're
Yeah.
trying to hurry you along while you're trying to like window shop and go into different stores.
Mhm.
It's not going to be enjoyable for you at all. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. I always say, whenever I go to the mall, I always see like the husbands holding the bags, like, oh.
Yeah. Or sitting on the bench outside the store, just looking completely
And
miserable. Yeah.
some of the stores have seats inside because they
Yeah.
know the poor partner is going to be dragged along while somebody's looking at something, and then they're stuck there. So they even put seating down in some stores for
Yeah.
to sit at. Yeah.
Well, and
Um,
even if you think about like if you were to go do an event, like whether it's the mall or hike, you'd want that person that you're going with to be a back and forth thing where you're enjoying each other, you're, maybe having conversation, you're interacting. It'd be very frustrating if the entire time you're with that person, the only time you heard from them is if you did something that annoyed them. Like
right.
you wouldn't want to be around that person. And I think a lot of times that's a mistake when we take our dogs for walks too, is we only pay attention to them when they're doing something that we dislike. And
Right.
then we don't understand why that behavior doesn't improve.
Right, exactly. And people have different ideas about what leash walking looks like.
Mhm.
Can you explain? I know you mentioned healing before, and I think a lot of people have an idea about that, but can you explain the difference between healing and loose leash walking? Because they are not one and the same.
Yeah. So I think there is some controversy in the forestry world about healing. I know some people disagree with it. So I'll just define the two. So I call healing the dogs at my side, walking at my pace. There's no sniff breaks. It is very intentionally strict. Whereas loose leash, go anywhere on the leash that you want, as long as there's not tension. If the dog wants to stop and sniff, I stop and let them within reason. We're probably not going to be standing there for half an hour, but basically letting the dog have that freedom to move the way that they naturally move and show interest in the things that they want to show interest in. I personally still actually encourage teaching both, and I can elaborate on why if you would like.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I think, yeah, like healing has a bad reputation, and I agree with that in a sense if you expect the dog to only heal the rest of its life. That's the analogy I use of going for walks with our eyes closed. You're never letting that dog actually have the freedom to enjoy the walk. But I do think there's a lot of, I guess, upside to still teaching healing. It really helps people hone their leash skills. It has the dog, when you first start training, close enough that you can do a lot of rapid rewarding, practice your own leash handling. So one of the mistakes I often see is people will stop to give the dog a treat when they're leash training, whereas the best way to do it is to reward what you want. So reward in motion. It's
Mhm.
easier to do if the dog's close to you. I just find overall there's better long-term results with leash training if you teach both skills. So I do usually the first week or two heavily promote healing as like the main priority. And then after that, I very infrequently use it.
Mm.
So I look at it as healing almost like a foundational skill.
Yeah, because it does make sense. If we need to reward our dog, we do want them near us. And so
Mhm.
kind of teaching them, to be around us and everything. And then when they get really good at it, we can give them a little bit more freedom. But then we still got this,
Exactly.
they can come near us if we need them closer. and everything.
Yeah, yeah. It's never to me something where I'm encouraging, 100% of your dog walk should be healing. Definitely not.
Mhm.
But it's a skill too, even if you take your dog on a walk and something happens, you need to get home quickly. If they have that history of healing, you can ask them for that behavior and you can just get home faster because there isn't sniff breaks. Or there's certain things like I live in a city of well over 1 million people. There's some sidewalks where it would be completely inappropriate to have my dog 10 feet away from me, right? There's too many pedestrians. So again, just asking them for that heel, they stay close to your side. So there's a little bit less of a nuisance if there's a really busy area that you're walking through to get towards the park or something.
Right. Yeah. And skills like that are very handy to have, like as you mentioned, but we definitely don't want the entire walk to be so regimented because the walk is
Yes.
the dog and everything. And so we want them to have some of that freedom, but then there might be times where it's like, oh, lots of people ahead. So, maybe on my 30-foot long line isn't quite appropriate to leave it that long for this amount of
Yeah.
time. That I'm going to have you kind of walk near me for now. And then when we pass this, then you can go sniff, go be a dog. I always say, go be a dog. Um,
Yes.
you can have that special tie back again and everything. So polite leash walking is one of the harder behaviors for puppy
Mhm.
parents and dog parents to teach. It doesn't come super easy because there is some skills involved with teaching that. And again, everything the dog loves is at the other end of the leash.
Yeah.
What is the best way to get started with leash training?
So mine again, this is a little bit different than I think some people teach it. The analogy I often give is if you were going to teach a kid how to spell, where would you have more success? Sitting at your quiet kitchen table or doing it at Disneyland, right? Where there's tons of sights and sounds. Um, I find that leash training is very similar. People that struggle with positive reinforcement for leash training, they'll often take their dog somewhere completely out of their dog's skill set and then hope that these treats magically encourage the dog to know what to do. And it doesn't work.
Right.
So I actually typically encourage starting leash training indoors without a leash, which sounds completely bizarre. But the reason I say without a leash is again, most people are very reliant on a leash for holding that dog and kind of forcing it to stay close to them. I find by unclipping the dog and starting training without a leash, you really figure out how much encouragement and reward your dog needs to have that become a choice that they're choosing to walk next to you when you can't force them to otherwise. So
Right.
I find it really helps with the guardians training as much as the dogs, just because you learn your dog and you learn, right, like how much reward it's required to make your dog really focused on you.
Hmm. Yeah. And I love how you talk about how, sometimes, and we're kind of guilty of, I want to have nice walks in the park. So we go to the park and we try to start there, but it's too hard. And, if we look at like the Olympians, they just don't go to the Olympics.
Yeah,
Olympic performances, they start in the gym and they start to hone their skills and they still don't go to the Olympics because they're not ready for it yet. And so they might do some local meets and then they're going to go maybe do some regional meets and then they get better and they hone their skills and they're doing competitions that are bigger and eventually the worlds and then they make it to the Olympics. But that doesn't
yeah,
happen. That they just don't go and then start to perform on the
yeah.
balance or any of that right then and
It's
there. Got to hone
such a
first.
great analogy. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And
the Olympics.
right? And all the basics. We're not just doing the floor exercise without learning how to do the round off first. We don't know how to do
Yeah,
the whole sequence just yet. Yeah. So yeah, I love.
I remember watching the Olympics a bit this summer, and there was some memes that were going around social media, and they were talking about how amazing it would be if before every single event they had just an average person try to demonstrate what these athletes were about to do, just to show because they make it look so easy,
Right.
and just to see a beginner trying it and fumbling through just how skilled these people truly are. And I think it's the same, you watch somebody out walking, same busy sidewalk. Like I could take my dog downtown in the city if I want, and I know she'll be wonderful on leash. But we did not start training there. And
Mm.
I often tell people like, you have to to teach your dog the alphabet before you ask them to spell, right? Like you have to set them up for progressively more and more difficult scenarios, but starting in a way where your dog can be successful, so there's something to reward and build upon.
Yeah. And you make a good point because when people are out and they see, Fido walking beautifully
Mhm.
on the trail or this person enjoying this nice leisurely walk on the beach and how wonderful that is. And I want to do that with my dog. So we go and we try to
Yeah.
do it, but we can't replicate it.
Yes. And then it's so stressful for you and the dog because everybody's having a bad time. Yeah.
The dog's like, but I just want to go like run in the water. And you're like, no, you have to, you're pulling me on leash and nobody's
Yeah.
having a good time and everything. But as you said, you didn't get to see all the hard work that that person put in to have that beautiful, relaxing,
Yeah.
walk on the beach or on the trail. You got to see that Olympic moment and didn't get to see all the sweat and maybe the tears that went into the training.
Yes. Yeah, I often joke and like I hope it doesn't come across rudely, but a lot of people want like their dog to have university level skills and their dog's never even started kindergarten. Like there's a mismatch of expectation versus actual learning that's happened. And really once you can kind of take a step back and think about what level is your dog truly at right now, which for most people it's complete basics and that's fine, that's where you start. And as your dog is capable of those, then you increase the difficulty. And then it's more fun the entire way through because there's not this struggle that you're constantly having of, right, that mismatch between putting the dog in a situation way beyond their skill set and hoping it works out.
Yeah, and I like what you said before. I can't remember what analogy you used, but by, not, doing the university level or whatever it was, because we don't do geometry before we learn how to do 1 + 1 is 2 and, 2 × 2 is 4. We learn these very basic skills first and
Yeah.
then grow to see how we apply them. But that doesn't come till later in everything. We
Yeah.
don't, we don't start here with geometry. We start here with different math, and then we work up our way with things like algebra and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Math, that's a terrible. I always hated math. I don't even know why I went with math analogy, but yeah, that's probably why because math is hard. But when teaching leash walking, it's common for people to solely, focus solely on the polite leash walking skill. Are there other skills that are helpful on walks?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of people, again, there's games, there's different things that you can do to encourage engagement. So I define that as your dog, checking in and kind of caring who's attached to the other end of the leash. I think that's really important. And then other skills, leave it is one that I think every single dog trainer or dog owner should teach, which again, it's kind of asking your dog, I'm sure you're interested in that thing. So it could be, trash that they find on the sidewalk or a bunny that they see run across the street, asking your dog to disengage from that and being able to verbally ask for that. So again, you're not relying on the leash to prevent your dog from going in that direction. And then one that I think is really important just for even, safety is drop it. So if your dog does put something in their mouth, being able to verbally ask them to release it. There's going to be all sorts of things regardless of where you live. I don't know your area, but we have a big magpie kind of issue here that they go into the trash all the time and they leave snacks on the sidewalk for dogs. So there's always things that my dog is finding and picking up. And that cue has been a lifesaver so many times.
Mm. And I like what you started off with, where you talked about attention games. And I think that's like so important for people to take away from, because if we can't get our dog's attention because we're not
Mhm.
nearly as exciting as the squirrel or the neighbor's cat or whatever else in the environment's happening, the kids on the playground, whatever it is, there's not a chance that we're going to have some polite leash walking because we don't actually exist because we can love our dog, but doesn't mean we have this training bond with our dog where they
Mhm.
actually they care that we're on the other end of the leash. Sometimes they don't even know you're. They're like, "Oh, you're still there." Um,
Yeah.
so being able to get that attention and know that you exist in that environment is huge. And I think that's like a huge pitfall if we don't really start there, because
Mhm.
we're just behind the 8 ball right away. And then that frustration is going to set in where it's going to be, oh, Fido is so stubborn, or they've got selective hearing, or whatever it is that we want to say. The dog is just, we just don't have that skill yet where we
Yeah.
matter in the environment. They care about the other stuff.
Well, yeah, and part of it comes down to that foundational level of increasing the difficulty appropriately, but also I'm going to give more analogies. Apparently, I love analogies today, but if you were sitting watching a TV show that you found really fascinating and somebody sat down next to you and started trying to talk to you, like you kind of tune that person out. And when we take dogs out on walks, again, they have that crazy sense of smell. So they're experiencing this really exciting thing. And we're kind of just over in the corner being like, Fido. Fido and not understanding why Fido doesn't seem to hear us, but they're
Right.
completely distracted. So,
Yeah. And then we say it more and louder because
yes.
more frequently and then louder. And then sometimes the angry tone comes in as we're saying it louder too,
Yeah.
uh, because they're just so distracted. I've often told a story. So if people have been following me for a while, they probably heard it. When I was in Florida one year visiting my parents and Toast was with us and we were walking and we're just walking leisurely and all of a sudden she just stops and then she back steps like a couple of, like maybe a half a foot. And then she sniffed and she sniffed and she sniffed and she sniffed. And I don't know what was really exciting about this particular
Yeah.
area, but there was something super awesome for her. And then a gentleman came walking down. He goes, "Hey, there's an armadillo over there this morning." I'm like,
Mm.
I knew there was something exciting over here. I didn't know what. She knew there was something exciting over
Yeah.
here. Awesome smell for her. But um, yeah, she just was like, "Hey, let's stop here and sniff for a while." And that's what we did. We hung out for a while because the walk was for her. And
Mhm.
that was super mentally enriching for her to stand there and sniff for like 5 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever it was. And then when she was ready, she moved on. It made her happy. And that was all
Yes.
enhancing that walk and everything.
Yeah, and I think if we can really try to think of it, the analogy I used of like the view, like letting your dog stop and take it, what's their view to them, right? Like this amazing experience. That's what the smell is, like them getting to figure out what that smell is, especially if it's something that's completely foreign and new to them. Like it's such an exciting moment. And I think it's important to let them enjoy that because it is, we don't like to think about it, but they are confined animals, right? Like they're kind of trapped in our home most of the day, especially we go to work, they're left alone. And the walk is really that exciting moment of their day when they get to go out and sniff things and see the world. And I think it has to be about more than just exercise. It has to be also about enrichment and letting them be a dog.
Yeah, and garbage day can be such an exciting day if you live in an area that's like a neighborhood where everybody's garbage goes out like the same day. Oh,
Hmm.
what an exciting time in the neighborhood for your dog that day, because that day of the week is like the best day because of all
Yes.
the smells coming from the recycling and from the trash. What's a treasure trove for your dog of excitement and enrichment taking in all those smells? Like, oh,
Hmm.
you know, the Millers threw away cat litter today. And oh, the Thompsons had pizza. Is that pepperoni I smell?
Yeah.
They're getting to kind of check out all this great stuff. So that neighborhood walk is more exciting and more enticing to them because of all of that buffet of scent that,
Yeah.
and it might, on a hot day, it might smell terrible to us, but to
Yeah.
the dog is like, it's fantastic.
Trash is something special to dogs. Yeah. And like, I know we talk about increasing difficulty like gradually and stuff, but once your dog is trained, I think even what you said about exciting and like new smells is important to keep in mind. A lot of time just for exercise and ease, I'll take my dog around my neighborhood, right? Like you leave your house, you walk straight from where you live. But a few times a week, I'll try to take her to a trail or even some other neighborhood, just so that, again, everything is completely new when it comes to smells. And those walks, they tire her out way more. She's way happier afterwards. It's really nice to just be able to offer opportunities to have those new smells.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to let them have that, as you said, tires are out. You can see the difference between doing the loop in your neighborhood and then going somewhere
Yes.
because all that sniffing and taking that in, that is mentally exhausting. And when you've got a
Mhm.
puppy, what a great way to exercise your puppy without getting them all amped up with running around and getting bitey and
Yeah.
chewy is to go on a sniffy walk and just let them take it all in, whether it's trash day or a new place that you walk. All of that sniffing is so exhausting, taking all of that in and deciphering all of those different smells and processing it all. And then you come home and they're just sacked out. Who doesn't want a puppy who is less bitey, less chewy, and everything,
Yes.
and come back from an
Calm and satisfied. Right. Yeah.
happy, satisfied from this lovely walk that you had? And so, not focusing on that end goal of I've got to get around the block and
Mhm.
just letting them, lead the way and have that nice little walk. That's lovely.
I
Yeah.
think especially too, if you think like when you're building that expectation, if you are starting with a puppy, I often, we use the Olympics as an analogy before, like if you only focus on the walk as exercise, if that's the only thing you're trying to get out of it and you want a calm dog, a lot of times people they believe that the dog just needs more exercise, more exercise.
Right.
But you just build a new level of fitness, and all of a sudden you have this Olympic athlete dog that requires 3 hours of intense walking per day. That's not great either. You have to meet your dog's exercise requirements, but at some point, if your dog still seems really hyper, I think of other reasons why, like what else is missing from what you're offering, whether that's sniffing or other levels of engagement, that the dog needs to be mentally satisfied. It's not all about the physics.
Exactly. Yeah. And we kind of sort of we kind of alluded to this a little bit before, but didn't really get to talk about it. Like there's a lot of different equipment out there. Some can help hinder the progress, some can cause harm. What kind of training tools do you suggest to get started with polite leash walking?
Yeah, so we touched on the leash before. My standard recommendation is at least a 6 foot leash. I prefer longer, but that's kind of usually where I'll start if people are hesitant and going too far. That's my minimum requirement. Again, just gives the dog that space to move off the sidewalk, have their sniff without putting tension on the leash. I usually suggest starting with a harness. Again, we don't want to have to pull back on the leash or hopefully have any leash tension during trainings. But if there is, a harness is going to protect your dog's really vulnerable neck. I always suggest treat training as a positive reinforcement trainer. So make sure they bring appropriate treats, a treat bag to carry those. And then again, controversy, and I feel like there's going to be a few people that listen to this and they're like, oh no, but I advocate against retractable leashes. A lot of people, when they first hear use a longer leash, that's kind of where their mind goes. But the whole mechanism of it is that there has to be tension on leash in order for that dog to get more freedom. So it can actually reinforce the behavior that you're trying to change, and it'll make the process a lot harder.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the retractable leashes. And I know some people are going to say, but they were for me. And if your dog walks nicely on leash, maybe so. But when you're teaching polite leash walking, it'd be a little bit of a
Exactly.
listen, years ago, I used to have a retractable leash, and I used it when we went to the river. So that way I didn't have to go into the cold water up to
Yep.
my feet or anything. But I actually quickly got rid of that because it really wasn't helping because it was always tense. And so then we
Yes.
to it to another line. This was like a forever ago. And everything. And I will say my daughter was a victim of a retractable leash incident when she was at a picnic one
Yeah.
day. Somebody's dog got excited, saw a squirrel, then went behind her, clotheslined her, took her up off the ground. She was bruised, she was bloody, just because she got caught up in that. And the backs of her heels were all sliced open from that retractable leash that the person had and everything. So, and I got a text from her cursing out the retractable leashes. I'm like, that's my girl.
Yes. It is wild. Like I'm not even going to guess at the stats, but if you actually look at the statistics on how many like serious injuries are caused by retractable leashes per year, it's wild. I think because again, the dog will either it'll get wrapped around, like you can lose a finger. I used to say that retractable leashes had like a time and a place. Like I never want to say never. Like I
Right.
think there's always exceptions to everything. But yeah, even after having a few clients where, they've been on retractable leashes and I've walked in to greet them and they wrap around your legs and even with pants on, if it gets tight enough, that line cuts in. I just don't think that they're worth it. They're almost trying to combine two things where you can at some point have your dog close to you and other times give them freedom. I just say just get a long line and just loop it, like curl it around so that when you want it to be shorter, that's all that's available.
Yeah. And I used to be the same thing. Like there's a time and a place for the retractable
Yeah.
leashes. And there was just too many things. And it's funny because you do think that the retractable leash incidents are probably like small, but when you see like how many challenges that there are and how many injuries, you're like, wow, it is more normal than not normal to have those issues and
Yeah.
everything. And when you do have that retractable leash, like in that case where that squirrel and that dog ran after the squirrel and my daughter was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. When because you could get tangled in a retract in a long line as well, but there's more leash. So when you see the dog moving, you can move out of the way. It just doesn't quickly, pull like
Yeah.
that happy clothesline like up against you and whatever. And you can just see it and you can just kind of move out of the way. So I do find those a little bit easier to do. And I know one of the challenges that I've always had was because when we used to do pet sitting as well, years ago, sometimes we'd show up to the house and we always brought our own equipment because of this. Like somebody'd have a retractable leash and like even the locking mechanism isn't working. Like it doesn't work. And so now the dog just has like 30 feet of leash, and you can't do anything about it because you've got this clunky handle and this long, corded type leash, and you have zero control over anything
Mhm.
and everything. So yeah, those locking mechanisms, they give out over time. And sometimes they're locked in and then they skip and they open, and then all of a sudden, boom,
Yes.
at
Well,
the
and
end.
I think about that a lot of, if you're unprepared, I guess, for your dog to all of a sudden take that level of freedom. Like if you're walking down a sidewalk and there's a squirrel across the road, like there's opportunity potentially for your dog to run out in front of a vehicle and you don't catch it in time. There's also always the risk of, I find them harder to grip personally than a regular leash. So you're more likely to drop it if your dog does startle and run after something. And then that sound of that big clunky plastic thing following them down the road can scare the dog enough into continuing to run
Yeah,
away from you.
chasing them.
Like it startles them. So I just, yeah, I hate being the person that's never or strongly against things, but that is one on my list that I always try to change people's minds on.
Yeah, I know we sound like we're terrible about the
I
practicing.
always get a social media comment every time I mention it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. When used properly. Um,
Yeah.
but and what I love about the long line instead of that is to kind of like not sound so negative about it, but for real purposes, if you're using a long line, your dog has that long line, it's not tight, and you can work on attention games. And so when your dog does move 10, 20, whatever, how long your line is, 30 feet away, your dog, you can practice them coming back to you and walking nicely, like, with me, or whatever word you want to use to walk close to you. They're actually learning to want to be around you when they've got all
Mhm.
that loose leash, as opposed to that tight leash just always pulling them away. That long
Yes.
line that they have is really helpful to you teaching the skills that you want, where the dog isn't
Mhm.
running off or is paying attention to you and is coming back to you. And so that's why I love the long line versus to put a positive spin on it, that's why I love the long line more than the retractable leash, because I can work at that into my training plan with that loose leash, because that's what I'm trying to achieve, is that loose leash walking.
Yeah, when you're talking about engagement and a long line, I'm very similar. Like one of my absolute favorite games that I find it's easy to gloss over because it's so simple that it's one of those things of like, how could something that simple actually do anything? But it's one of the few games I suggest to everybody because it just changes that dog's level of focus on you out in the environment, is dropping a couple treats. I mean, depends on season here, either grass or snow.
Mhm.
So the dog actually has to sniff and find them as you run to the end of the long line. Preferably, like you said, if you had a 30-foot one, like you could be so far from your dog
Mhm.
that once they find those treats, you call their name. As they come back to you, they get one more, drop more treats, and run away again. It
Yeah.
just teaches them that after a little bit of a distracted situation, right? Like they've been sniffing, they found treats, they're a little bit distracted, to still then, as a default behavior, start looking to see where you went and orient back to you. And it makes such a massive difference with slow leash walking that it is one of the best uses of a long line, I think.
Exactly. And you can't do that with the retractable leash because you've got that tension on there
Tension.
and everything.
Exactly.
So you're not you're not mimicking the, oh no, my dog is loose, let me see if I can get them back, because you're actually
Hmm.
practicing that in those scenarios and everything. So yeah, and I love Find It too. I mean, like you said, I can't remember how you explained it, but I always joke around it, but I think it's stupid easy. Like anybody can learn it. You don't need like a lot of skill and everything.
Yes.
It's a stupid easy game, and it's so practical for being so simple. Like it's
Yes.
such a go-to. It's like a get out of jail free card for
Hmm.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I find the really, really simple things, people like it's that mentality of like this is too easy to actually be effective.
yeah,
And
it's
I'm
just,
like, take it as a gift. It's the easiest game. Your dog is going to absolutely love it. And it really, really teaches the skills that you want them to have, which is engagement outdoors, right? Like you want a dog that looks to see who is on the other end of the leash, where you are. And it's such a fun way of building that in.
yeah. And because polite leash walk can feel a bit of a challenge to teach, sometimes dog guardians are told they need to be more firm or to use different types of pieces of equipment, like don't use that harness. I'd like to take a
Mhm.
minute for us to address whether it's possible to achieve polite leash walking manners using things like harnesses and being force free.
Mhm. Yeah, there's always that I think you'll see it commonly on social media where harnesses teach dogs to pull, and it's not true. They just don't teach dogs not to pull. I think that there's a huge distinction there that we have to address. Um, I am one where I've openly publicly talked about my crossover journey. Like I used to be somebody that truly believed sometimes punishment was required to train a dog. And now I'm completely on the other side. And it's because I have so much experience where now I've worked with dogs that have, 8-year history of very aggressively pulling on leash that now walk like a dream. So I've seen all these really drastic situations where not a single punishment technique or being stern or any of that stuff has been required. So I very, very strongly believe that force free can work for all dogs and leash skills.
Mm. Yeah, because we're just making it a fun game to want to be near us, right?
Yeah.
Fun. Like
It,
they want to be biased because we've made it just a fun and engaging game. And this is great partnership that we have together.
mhm. And I think one of the biggest mistakes or when people say like rewards or positive reinforcement fails is when you use the tool incorrectly. Treats are just they're not magic. They're not there to bribe your dog or, elicit certain behaviors. They're there as a reward after the dog has already offered what we deem desirable behavior. I think that's a really important thing to remember. So
Mm.
the dog has to be set up for training in a way that they can be successful. So there is something to reward and then something to build upon.
Right.
Whereas if we put a dog completely over their skill level and then hope this magical treat bag is going to solve it won't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that goes back to working at your dog's level and not taking them to the park when they're not ready to play leash walk at the park with the kids on the playground and the other dogs walking and the mom with the jogging stroller and all of that.
Mhm.
It's not ready for that. And it doesn't matter. You could probably hang filet mignon around your neck. The dog might not care because all that chase factor and all that excitement and there's kids and all this other stuff is way too exciting for them. So,
Yes. Or
yeah.
even just overwhelming. Like I think a lot of the times, if you actually watch a dog that's, tuned out the guardian and doesn't seem to be listening, they are so over threshold and overstimulated that you might be asking them to do something that you say that they know, but they don't know how to do it in that situation. And one of the another analogy I often give is like if you ask me right now to say my ABCs to you, I could easily do it. Like ABCs are not that tricky. But
Right.
if you put me on stage in front of 10,000 people and said, say your ABCs into this microphone, I'm going to stumble. Like I'm going to be so overwhelmed that it's the same task, but where I'm being asked to execute that is completely going to change whether or not I can do it. And I think it's a lot different if we ask a dog to walk nicely next to us in our boring neighborhood versus, taking them downtown and there's hundreds of people and dogs and all this stimulation around them. It sounds like the same thing to us, but it's not the same request.
Right. Yeah. And it's not that different if you think about it, like you know how to drive a car, right? You know how to listen to music. You can do the two together. I listen to music all the time while I'm driving. But when we're having like a lot of snow or torrential downpour,
Mhm.
what do? We turn that off. We might turn it down
Yeah.
at because we're trying to concentrate. And then
Mhm.
it's like, I have to turn this off. Now we know how to drive. We know how to jam and listen to music. We know how to do the two together. Why do we have to turn it off? Because it's distracting.
Yeah.
We can't focus in the way that this is. This isn't like really normal. And that's kind of like our dogs, except we're asking them to still drive the car with the
Mhm.
music blasting. They don't have a chance to turn it down. They can't turn the nature down. They can't turn it. It's still out there in like Dolby sound for them. And it's too hard and everything.
Yeah.
And we make those adjustments for us like I can't concentrate. I have to turn this down. Or if you're doing something at home and you got the TV on in the background, you're like, I got to turn that off because I can't focus on my work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So same thing.
Um, Sorry, I don't know if that came up on the screen, but I just had a call come in, so I just exited out of it.
Not a problem at all.
But
Um,
yeah, I mean, that analogy, like, can you imagine if the first time you learned to drive, there's like a boom box in the back seat blasting so loud, and you can't even basically hear the request of the person next to you, and they're getting frustrated with you because you're not paying attention. Like, if we really think about the situations we put dogs
mhm,
into and expect them to perform, there's no, like, it makes complete sense why they struggle.
right.
So I
Yeah.
think a lot of it is there's small things that you do, but really the way that you set up the training is whether or not your dog's going to be successful.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And we're just full of analogies today.
I
Like,
know. I was like, how many can I give before it gets
yeah,
awkward?
well, I'll have to like count them later on. But just like us, like we're like kind of on autopilot when we go to certain places. We know how to get there. We know where to turn. We don't even think about what roads they are, right? We just do it. But then if we go somewhere new, we've got the GPS on, we might get turned off that highway that we're familiar with, but now we don't know where the heck we're going. And so we might turn that radio off. We might ask the kids, can you be quiet? Mom's trying to concentrate, because we're trying to figure out where to go. This is unfamiliar territory to us. And there's just too much going on visually and everything to know exactly what we're doing. We need to concentrate to figure that out. And that's basically what we're
Yeah.
asking dogs to do every single time when we go out.
Yeah. And we also have to consider, I mean, we're adults, right? Like adult brains, a lot of the time, if you really compare usually dogs to humans, we put them more at like a toddler level of capacity. So it's not even asking an adult to perform in these situations. It's like asking your 3-year-old.
Right.
And
Good
yeah,
point. Absolutely.
like,
And
so,
so we did mention a couple of times, treats and stuff. And just like having, the right equipment and stuff to train our dogs and setting that for success, we've got to have the right rewards. That's really important. So what kind of rewards and treats do you suggest for reinforcing these types of behaviors?
yeah, so if you look at treats, like kind of anything about them online, you'll probably hear the term high value. I think the definition of that to me would just be something's high value if your dog's willing to work really hard to get it.
Right.
So if you use something that's lower value, so a lot of people, if they start leash training, they might use their dog's kibble or like milk bones. These are things that aren't as rewarding to the dog. You're not going to get that same level of engagement and wanting to work for it as if you choose something that's high value. High value treats, I usually say, are the meaty ones, right? Like that's what the dog wants. So if it can be soft and stinky, it's usually even more rewarding. But usually anything that's pure meat, so liver treats, bacon treats, that sort of thing. And then I also often advocate for using what I call very high value rewards. And that usually is human food. Typically, it's going to be the most exciting to dogs. So little tiny pieces of cheese or cooked ground beef. Sometimes I'll use pork chop, that sort of thing, as something that's really extra special if I'm working on something really hard.
Mhm. Yeah, because there's this common misconception that, dogs should just do it to please us, but
Mhm.
that's not how it works. So, like, they don't do
Yeah.
things to please us. Like, they don't even have that mindset. Like, we don't even want to do things just because sometimes, right? But we have a different thought. We know that, "Oh, I got to go to that dinner on Friday, even though I don't want to, because it's the right thing to do." We can
Mhm.
rationalize things differently with our big human brain versus the doggy lizard brain that they have. They don't have that type of thought process. And so, you know, if we could get away with not doing things, we would, but we're human. And so it's a little bit different. And the dogs are just doing what works and being
Yes.
dogs and everything. And so they're not going to do it to please us at all. That's not in their skill set. Like, I want to do it because it really makes my person happy. That they don't think that way.
Mhm. Well, and I think even, dogs very much they live in the moment, right? Like they're thinking of right now, their exact situation. Whereas, you're using the example of like a dinner party on Friday that you maybe don't want to go to. We can kind of conceptualize usually there's going to be a reward or a punishment if we don't go. Like say it's a work dinner and you don't attend, you might get in trouble by your boss. So we can kind of think in advance and understand what's associated long term, whereas dogs really think of what's right now.
Right.
Um, and for the rewards, yeah, the whole concept of, dog's best friend, dogs are here to please us. I think we need to move away from it a bit because yes, dogs love us, but they are also their own sentient beings. They have things that they want as well. And I think that if we are asking them, particularly in the case of leash walking, we're asking them to walk in a manner that is not their natural way of movement. There should be something in that for them if we're being fair in return. And, we're talking about like work dinners. Like we wouldn't go and show up to our job if we weren't going to get a paycheck. Like we demand a reward in certain actions. So I think it's completely fair to offer the same back to our dogs.
Yeah. And we just know, right? Like, same with us. If something works out and it's good, we want to do it again. If we
Mhm.
don't enjoy it, we don't want to do it again. And so
Yeah.
we've got to make it worth it for our dogs with bits of cheese or liver or whatever it is,
Mhm.
and everything. And we talk about high value rewards. What we think is high value, the dog might not think is high value, right? It has to be something
Yes.
the dog loves. Because we could say, I have cheese, but the dog might be like, I don't care about cheese. But
Yes.
anyway, so it's got to be something that the dog really enjoys as well. Because like you said earlier, like they what can I do to get that? Like that old commercial, I'm probably dating myself now. Like, what would you do for a Klondike bar? Like that old ice cream
Yes.
commercial years ago. Like, what would you do for a Klondike bar? That was their big thing because it was supposedly such a great ice cream that people would do anything to get it. And that's kind of that Klondike moment for our dogs.
And I find it fascinating. So one way I often tell people to actually test what's high value to their dog rather than guessing is if you put like two different treats in a hand, close, see which one your dog chooses first. They're going to be able to smell it. They're going to make their choice. If they make that same decision, say like, a bacon versus a beef one over and over, if bacon's chosen first every single time, you can reasonably assume that's higher value to your dog because they selected it first. If it's interchangeable, then I would use them interchangeably during training. But it's really fascinating to test because I love bacon. I assumed my dog highest value would be bacon, but when I compared bacon and ground beef as her ultimate, there was no there was no question that ground beef won every single time. So it was interesting to see that my assumption was incorrect. And now if I'm working on something really hard with her, I know what to use. And also, we've talked my dog is a mix of two different herding breeds. She's very food motivated, but when she was younger and I was trying to work on her very strong desire to chase bunnies and squirrels and pretty much anything that moved, no food was a high enough reward for her. She actually preferred using fur toys and playing. So I think trying to figure out what really matters to your dog and incorporating that as a reward is important if you want them to work harder, right? Where the paycheck analogy, like I would work way harder for $1,000 than I would for 10. The
Right.
dog's going to be the same.
Yeah. Like if somebody had 5 acres of land and they said, I'll give you $10 to mow it, you're gonna be like, no way. And they're like, well,
Exactly.
I'll give you $250 to mow it. You're like, okay, I can do that. Like
Hmm.
that reward system that we're in. And I think it's also important to remember that when we talked earlier about setting our dogs up for success and working at their level and not in a place that's too hard, even if your dog loves ground beef might not be a match for the park because there's too much going on, right? It's high value,
Yes.
might be high value in the neighborhood, but it's not high value at the park because the squirrel is way more rewarding to chase than the
Yes.
ground beef. So we want to make sure that we don't get locked in on this is my dog's end all be all treat. They love this one
Mhm.
so much because it might not matter to a hill of beans compared to the neighborhood cat that they like to chase and everything.
Yes.
Something better than the cat. There's got to be something
Yeah.
better than whatever it is. They have to love
And
that.
that's the whole thing about like treats aren't magic. They're rewards for already executing on the behavior that we deem desirable, right? Like they're not in a really, really stimulating situation that your dog's not ready for. Like when people say their dog isn't food motivated and they can have that piece of bacon right in front of the dog's nose, the dog could not care less. And then the person says their dog's not food motivated. It's not true because if the dog was offered that same thing at home, they would be very interested in it. It's just the dog is so overstimulated that the food doesn't have its value anymore.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, this is way too exciting. This is way too much. I don't even care
Yep.
about that anymore. And I know for Toast, her super duper high value, if we're working on something new that I want to have like that really, real high value food is chicken McNuggets. Loves chicken McNuggets. I don't know what it is about the chicken McNuggets, but she
Fair.
just finds those fantastic. And sometimes people are like, chicken McNuggets are terrible, but we're not having a diet of chicken McNuggets. We are just cutting up. If I buy a 20-piece chicken McNugget, I can get a ton of treats out of those. We're not eating
Yes.
all on the same day. We are using those all week long and everything if we're teaching something new. But that's her big, huge, high value. She loves chicken McNuggets. I think her eyes would go in different directions if they when there was chicken
Yeah.
McNuggets. That's her thing. She
Is
loves
when you see the dog pull out all stops and offer every trick that they possibly know just because they're trying to get the reward. And I think
exactly.
what you said is really important too, where you talked about really tiny pieces. Because
Mhm.
I find a lot of people, again, they want to really reward their dog. So a lot of dog training treats are actually substantial size, just the way they come in packages. And people bring that out on walks. And one, the dog has to sit there chewing.
Yeah.
I always tell people if your dog has to chew a training treat, the training treat's too big.
Right. It shouldn't look
Um,
like they've got
or,
gum in their mouth.
yeah, or they have so many in such a high amount that even if the dog loves that food, it loses its value. Like I love cheesecake. The first couple bites are amazing. If I was to eat the entire cheesecake, I don't want the full thing anymore, right? Like it wouldn't have the same level of enjoyment as the first few bites. So I
Right.
always tell people if you're training, also try to use really small ones. And also that way that they don't get full, the dog doesn't get an upset stomach, and just have those treats lose their value. Do
Mhm.
you want it to stay really high value the whole time you're using it and then shut down training before your dog loses their interest in it?
Yeah, and if the pieces are too big, they're going to get full. I mean, just think about like after you have like a big meal, whether you go out for some function or you had just like a holiday meal, when you've eaten and overeaten because everything was so good, you're just laying on the couch. You do not want to move for the rest of the night because you're so full. And
Yeah.
if we cut our pieces too big, our dogs can definitely want to just, put on their stretchy pants and go lay on the couch
Yeah.
too quick and everything.
Yeah.
And dogs aren't dumb. They know the difference between things. So like we'll make like kibasi and pierogies. And I had purchased one day this kibasi from a European market. So it was nothing like the kibasi you buy in the grocery store. This stuff was amazing. Like I'm drooling thinking about it and everything right now. And I had given my dog some of that. And now my dogs have had some kibasi bits before as special training treats. When I've had some, I'm like, oh, I'm going to cut up a little piece of this and use this as training treats. When I had given that to my dogs, they ate it and they looked at me like, well,
Yeah.
what was that? Now they've had kibasi before, but they're not dumb. They know the difference. They knew the difference in this before, like, well, that's delicious. And I'm not sure we've ever had anything like that before, even though we have. You can see
Mhm.
the more of the yes, I'm listening going on. And I was like, well, good to know that that's also a super duper high value reward
Yes.
versus the stuff in the grocery store and everything. So yeah, they know the difference between different stuff. They're not dumb. Sometimes we're like, well, they're dogs, they like anything. Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah. There's a difference between, yes, they're natural foragers and like they'll eat what they find versus they will have a selective, if they're given two options, they're gonna have one that they choose more. And even what you were saying about training things, if the dog has had that same reward over and over day after day, it loses its value too. Whereas if it's something special like that, where all of a sudden your dog's like, what is this? Even if it's a food that they've had, it kind of makes it's new and exciting again if some time has passed. So I think even if you choose something like if my dog had ground beef every single training session, it loses some of its specialness, right? By
Right.
having a variety, same as us. You can have your absolute favorite dinner, but if you eat it every single day for 30 days, you're going to hate it by the end.
Yeah, it's
So,
not special anymore, right? Like
yeah,
we always, well, not always, but we got on this tradition where I would make filet mignon for Christmas dinner, and everybody would always look
amazing.
forward to it. But if I made filet mignon every Sunday for dinner when
Mhm.
Christmas rolled around, it wouldn't be as exciting anymore because we have it all the time. So it's not as special. It's not as exciting anymore.
Yeah,
It's and everything. So, but when I only make it once a year, it's like, oh gosh, we're having filet mignon tonight. Excellent.
yeah,
Everything. It's we it doesn't lose its luster that way. So
exactly. That's a good way of saying it. Yeah.
and then there's a lot of things that can really bamboozle our leash walking skills as we're trying to help our puppy learn to do the polite leash walking. How can we manage situations where our puppies might not be ready for?
Mm. Yeah. So, management, like the term itself, I define as anything that prevents an undesirable behavior. So, in this context, it's anything that would make your dog potentially pull on leash would be something that you could manage against. So we talked earlier about when you start leash training, I actually started indoors. But once you take it outside, we were talking about setting our dogs up for success. We have no idea when you step out your front door exactly what's going to happen. Like I can't control whether there's a squirrel. Like I might be understand that my dog's not ready for it, but I can't control whether it occurs. And that's where management is so important because you need to have these pre-rehearsed skills in place that if you do encounter something that your dog is not equipped for, you have a way of managing that situation to prevent the pulling. Some of my absolute favorites, I know a lot of people call it funnel hand, where you'll have like a bunch of treats in your hand and you slowly feed them out to kind of keep your dog lured and focused on you when you go past something distracting. I call it Kong hand, but whatever you want to call it. There's emergency recall or sorry, emergency U-turn, where if there's something, you're walking down the road and you can see a situation, you're like, it's going to be disaster. There's six barking dogs up there. My puppy will definitely pull. If you have this cue that asks them to completely turn and go the opposite way with you without any leash tension, that's an option for management. There's lots of different ones where, yeah, you just have these pre-rehearsed skills in place that you can use when needed. If you see a situation that your dog is it's going to fail, you remove them from that situation.
Yeah. And, you know, we're talking about management and earlier we were talking about setting the dogs up for success and not putting them in situations that they can't handle and kind of like keeping them under threshold. And these are two key ingredients to successful polite leash walking. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about um, what threshold is, because we talk about setting the dog up for success and not letting them, keeping them under a threshold and stuff like that. But what does that mean and why is this important?
So I define threshold again as like it's kind of that tipping point. The analogy I often give people is you think of your front door threshold, right? Like you step over this threshold, you go from outside to inside. You're in two different zones. A dog threshold is an emotional one where they go from coping and thinking to simply reacting. There's not a lot of thought process anymore. It's impossible to properly train a dog that's over threshold because they're mentally so oversaturated that they can't actually comprehend the requests that you're making of them anymore. There's lots of things that affect dog threshold, but it's just important to keep in mind that if we want to be fair, we have to train them under it.
Mhm. Yeah, because I think sometimes the frustration comes in with people where we'll just use the neighborhood cat, for example. I used to have a client who I swear every time they took their dog out, that cat came out on purpose. Um, where the dog could see the cat sometimes, but sometimes then the dog would quote unquote go berserk. And it's not that the dog couldn't see the cat. It's just that sometimes they were too close. So the dog was now over threshold. So it kind of gets a little bit muddied where it's like, but sometimes we can walk by the cat nicely and sometimes we can't walk past the cat. And it's not that the dog can't walk past the cat at this distance. It's just that when they're too close, they're at that part where they just can't, they lose control. They can't think. There's no processing going on.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, distance, I think, is one of the number one things that affects threshold typically. Like the dog, your puppy, if you're walking it down the street, they might be completely fine ignoring a dog that's a block away. But if you were to pass that same dog on the sidewalk, they're probably going to pull towards it. Like it's a completely different reaction, even though it's the same dog.
Mhm.
Intensity. So if there's five dogs versus one, that's going to make a big difference. Prior experiences makes a big difference. There's a lot of different factors, but it is important that, yeah, that's that inflection point of the dog isn't actually capable of executing on what we're asking them anymore. And what can we do to make the situation more fair and actually appropriate for training?
Mhm. Yeah, and understanding that, like taking notice to those things. Like when we're outside, sometimes we can walk past dogs, sometimes we can't. What are those
Why?
situations where your dog is able to, when you're practicing the polite leash walking, pay attention, so to speak? And when
Mhm.
are the times where you're like, ah, you know, they're just being difficult? Like, what are those scenarios? How close are you? That's going to give you like a lot of clues and help to set yourself up for success when you're polite leash walking as well. As if you know that, Fido can see the dog from 10 feet away and walk by no problem. But if we're 6 feet away, that's when, all the leash walking that you've been working on just goes
Yeah.
to heck. and
Yeah.
every, and it's like, well, it's just not working. No, it's just not working in this particular scenario because the dog doesn't know how to do it in this scenario. We can do it at
Yes.
10 feet, we just can't do it at 6 feet. And then there's all this space in between that we have to practice and move closer.
And I think too, it's important to keep in mind, like, that doesn't mean that your dog can never do it. I think people also that, they get kind of upset that they want their dog to be the dog they can just take for a walk, walk past another dog right on the sidewalk, and everything's fine. Like you can get there. You not being there now is not the same as it being impossible for your dog, but it's that foundational skill development where can you practice and set up training in a way that you can take the dog from that 7 foot zone to that 1 foot zone, but you can't do it in one session. Like
Right.
that's, I think, the big, it takes time and it takes repetitions, but your dog can figure it out. It's just you have to do it in a way where they can actually comprehend the lesson that you're trying to teach.
Yeah. And when I'm working on polite leash walking, I'll go into this little town next door. And the way the town is set up, like on this block, there's a lot of stores that you can go in that are these little shops and coffee and all this stuff, and people sitting outside having lunch and whatnot. But if you're on this block over here, there's not a lot of those types of businesses. There's
Mhm.
more like old homes that have been converted to like things like law offices and stuff like that. And so it's much easier to practice over here,
Mhm.
but my puppy can still hear and see a lot of the stuff that's going on over there, but we're just not in the middle of it. It's not that we can't ever walk there. We're just not ready for that Olympic event yet.
Yes.
Got to start here where there's less stuff that's going to draw their attention before we try to go over here where the ducks and everything are, because
Yes.
it's not going to work.
Yeah. It's that whole like kindergarten versus university level, right? Like you have to put your dog into situations that match their current abilities. Like one of the things I always say is that you train for the situation, not in the situation. Like you have to prepare your dog for
Right.
these things. And then it's completely possible to have a dog that essentially bomb-proof. Like my dog can walk past dogs that are barking right in her face. She couldn't care less. She will walk past without leash tension. But that is not where we started when she was a puppy.
Mhm.
So it's that really like that skill development over time that
Yeah.
makes a massive difference.
And I think that's really key is patience and time. Two things that we are not good at with humans, have time and having patience.
Yeah.
We're not going to teach polite leash walking in 3 days or a weekend or a week. We've got to start with some very foundational skills and then we've got to build on it. And just because you might go in your neighborhood and your puppy is starting to walk awesome in the neighborhood, because that's where you keep practicing and practicing and practicing,
Mhm.
then all of a sudden you go to the park, it almost is like your puppy doesn't know those skills yet.
Yes.
So that doesn't translate until you keep doing more and more practicing. And so it's going to take some time and repetitions and repetitions and repetitions and repetitions to get there and everything. So setting yourself up for reasonable expectations is key as well. So that way we don't get frustrated with our puppies.
And I mean, I've said the whole like treats aren't magic a few times, but I think it's also worth keeping in mind that we're not trying to have whatever reward we're using compete with the environment. Like if we're trying to do that, we're not using it correctly. There is often that kind of, the sentiment that force-free or rewards-based training is bribery. And
Yeah.
the actual definition of bribery is if the treat is presented in order to elicit the action or behavior that we want. That's bribery. The way
Right.
that you're properly using them is the dog has already done the thing that we deem desirable, and then you pay them for that. Um, so when you talk about training drop it as like a really valuable skill for leash walking, where if there's something in their mouth, they release it on cue. My dog often finds like chicken bones or whatever. Most of the treats that I'm carrying out on that walk, in terms of value, they can't compete with that chicken bone.
Mhm.
But she has been rehearsed so many times that when she hears drop it, it's this involuntary, like it just happens quickly before she even really sits there and goes like, what am I going to get for doing this?
Right.
Because we've done that through repetition, that she'll spit out anything she finds in order to get whatever I have on me. So it's not necessarily even that we have to have the reward be this amazing thing that competes with whatever amazing thing is out in the environment. It's just if you really have that repetition and reinforcement history, your dog learns to just offer those default behaviors, and that's when walks get incredible.
Yeah, and that's where the magic actually happens is the dog has done it so many times that you ask them to do it, they're able to do it without even thinking because of that reinforcement history. They just know when you ask me to do this, awesome stuff happens. And then
Hmm.
just do it without even they don't even think about it and everything. So one last thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was because we did talk about building that engagement and attention and all of that. Do you have any tips on building engagement while out on walks?
So my favorite one, and I always tell people like do this to the point that you feel a little bit crazy. But if your dog looks at you, we call it like a voluntary check-in. So without any sort of cueing, if your dog pays attention to you in any manner, whatever tool you're using, whether it's a clicker or marker word, mark that moment to tell them that what they did was great, that you want it, and they'll come back to you to get that reward. And it again, it's just teaching them that, hey, every single time I check in to see what my guardian's doing while we're out here, something great happens to me. You'll really notice that all of a sudden you seem much more fascinating to your dog while you're outside. And you phase it out over time. Like this isn't going to be something that every time your dog glances at you when they're 10 years old, you're still giving a reward every time. But I always say, like when you first start training it, do it to the point that you feel a little bit crazy and then slowly back off and just notice how much more interesting you are to your dog.
Right. Yeah, and that's just such a simple thing to do. Like you could just stand in your backyard and every time your puppy, just happens to glance over at you after they've been checking out the world, you just give them that yes or that click or whatever, and then you reward them. You're really building up some great skills. It's just so simple.
Mhm.
'Cause, I mean, you could be dead tired that day and be like, oh, I don't feel like doing anything. You just sit out on your deck or your patio, and every time your puppy checks in with you, you can just reward them. It can be so simple to do something
Yes.
like that. Yeah. Um, yeah. And so I know you have something for our audience before I let you go. Do you want to share what it is that you're giving to them today?
Yeah, so I have like a lot of things we've talked about. I have video and blog
Mhm.
breakdown of a lot of the training process that I recommend. So there will be a link that I think you can provide them where they can get that for free.
Mhm. Yep. We're going
So
to
yeah.
that's right below this video here. And then you have something else that you wanted to offer the audience as well, I think.
So I do also have a leash training program. It's a PDF, it's a digital guide. It takes you through how I recommend starting leash training and everything that you need to do for 6 weeks. So it takes everything we talked about where there's all these great concepts, but what order do you apply them in for best results, right? Like we're saying management, we're saying this engagement game, like when do you implement each thing? My program breaks down exactly which week I think you should start doing each one for best results.
Awesome. That'll be super, super helpful for people. So this has been fantastic. It was a lot of fun. And we know we joked about analogies, but if I had some spare time, I'll count how many we had because I think that would be like a fun game. Like, guess how many pieces of candy are in the jar. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but thank you so much for being here today. This was fantastic. And thanks for offering your gift to the audience. And again, those are all going to be at the link
Mhm.
below this video, so you'll be able to find it really simply. And before I let you go, do you have any last minute words of wisdom or advice that you'd like to share and leave everybody with?
Actually, if it's okay, I was just going to elaborate on that, the free version,
Mhm.
the link that you'll be providing. It is broken down. I always say like everybody learns differently. So there's blog versions and there's also I have a YouTube channel. So it shows you video demonstrations of these things so that you can actually follow along with your dog at home, which I think is helpful just to see uh, how it looks with a real dog. All the ones I film with are actually clients of mine that are in training. So it's not like you're watching a dog that's already very skilled learn these behaviors. You're actually watching a dog learn on camera.
Yeah, that's fantastic too. And yeah, people do learn differently. Some people can read and apply, and some people are like, I need to see
Show
it.
me. Yeah, I'm a show me person, so that's why I tend to lean more towards video content. But
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that'll be super helpful. And I love that you have those two options for people so they can work with which works best for them. So yeah.
yeah, like final words, I guess, just that kind of we've talked about it all throughout, but just really to be reasonable in your expectations for your dog and kind of put yourself in their shoes and whether or not it's a situation that's fair to them. And I think if you progress incrementally, if you have these foundational skills, it's incredible the walks that you can have with your dog with just rewards-based training. But it takes time, it takes consistency, and it's worth it. You're gonna have your dog for a very long time. You're gonna go on so many walks together, and putting in, weeks or months of training at the beginning gives you so many years of just really great experiences.
That's perfect. That's a great way to end it. Well, thanks again, Stephanie, for being with us today. I really appreciate you being part of the event. I'm so happy that you're here. And thanks for everybody for joining us today. Have a great day, everyone.
Please let me know in the comments what you thought of this interview. Happy training. I'll see you in the next video.